Okay, folks, we get started. Let's get started. Thank you so much for being here. Wonderful turnout. Excited to hear from Carla in just a minute here. But before we do that, wanted to give a moment for our lunch sponsor to say a few words. Always grateful to Home Trust Bank and Paul Heathman. So,
hey y'all. How is lunch? By the way, pretty good. That's Apollo Flame. They do a pretty good pizza. I don't see them on the pizza rating list, but salad's good too. Yeah, it's pretty good. So you guys watching interest rates lately? A little bit. My hair turned gray watching interest rates this year. So the Federal Reserve is obviously in the news more than ever this year. And I'm just going to talk very briefly about kind of what they're doing. You might know already that they really have one thing that they can do. They can push interest rates up and bring them down. And they do that as a result of a very complicated set of things reports that they get. And their plan is always to map out what they're going to do several months in advance and then exactly stick to that plan. The markets really like it when they do that. And that's not what they've been doing. They keep deviating from their plan, which is why mortgage rates have just been all over the place. I used to see mortgage rates change, you figure, well, better get this rate locked in this week sometime. That was years ago. Now you better do it this hour or it may change. Rates change twice a day some days. So I don't see that changing anytime soon. The Fed always talks about the conflicts, world conflicts that are happening. They're trying to control inflation, of course, by pushing interest rates up. But particularly the conflict in the Middle East has impact on petroleum prices. And petroleum prices are inflationary, and it's nothing the Fed can do anything about, right? The price of petroleum is built into every product and service that we consume. So we'll see what that results in, but it's definitely a situation the Fed can't do anything about. So that's kind of the larger where we are in Fed policy and mortgage rates. We were in the upper sevens, average 30-year fixed. We are now locking at under 7, 6.875. I've seen a couple of times this week. So, of course, credit scores and loan to value and many things play into that. But it's good to see. It makes a big impact on a payment, 7 3/4 down to 6.875. Hopefully, the target rate Fannie Mae says someday, we'll see again when the dust settles, sort of is 4.5. I'm not sure I see that. Maybe 5. 5.5 is really more reasonable thing. There's a few things we can do, buy down options. There's all kinds of kind of interesting loan products out there these days to kind of help against it. So as of today, the Federal Reserve got 2 reports. It's the employment report, which unemployment came in lower than expected today, which means that the economy is okay and the Fed will lower rates. Not really. The market would normally think that, but also JOLTS. Anybody know what JOLTS is? So that's another report. It's job openings and labor turnover. It really has to do with just the labor market as it's looked at from the business perspective. Sort of the unfortunate thing is that a loosening labor market reduces the pressure for increased wages. So now we may be in a situation where we won't see inflation fall quickly, and we also aren't going to see increased wages. So this is the hardest on our kind of middle, what we used to call the middle class. Anyway, that's my little market update. I'm Paul Heathman. I'm a mortgage loan officer with Home Trust. I'm 10 years in now, so I'm still the new guy at Home Trust. If you know Home Trust, many of us have been there for 35 years. My boss, Christine Dozier, probably know her. She wouldn't want me to tell you. She's 30 something, we'll say. So I am also on our affordable housing committee that Tommy leads here at the Board of Realtors. I act also as a liaison because I'm a member of the Affordable Housing Advisory Committee at the City of Asheville. So we're doing policy work to try to make it easier to develop affordable housing in our city. I'm also on the board of directors of the Home Builders Association and the chair of the Parade of Homes Committee. So that Mary is on. So yeah, please join us for all those. I would also like to invite you next week. Two very important lunch and learns are happening back to back. The first is that the city of Asheville has been waiting on so many votes for a missing middle housing study that we commissioned. Time and time again, council says, yeah, let's wait to vote on that until we get the missing middle study back. So missing middle housing, not to be confused with middle income. Missing middle housing is essentially we have very dense, large apartments, and we have single family homes and almost nothing in between, right? So the reaction should be that we should amend policy to make it easier to develop ADUs, row houses, cottage homes, duplexes, triplexes, quadplexes, that in the middle housing that just really almost doesn't exist in Asheville. If you ever had a customer looking for a duplex, you know that there aren't very many. When they come on, they go off the market pretty quickly. So the lunch and learn, they're on 13th and the 14th. I'm not going to remember which is which. Matt might help me.
The 13th is missing middle.
Okay, so the 13th next week is the missing middle housing study presentation. So Vidila from the city of Asheville is going to come and speak about the results of that study. So awesome way to like not have to read the 155-page report. So, the very next day, Mountain True is an environmental group in our area, long time, really, really great organization. And this may be the first example of an environmental group being a proponent of housing. They oftentimes accidentally end up opposing housing development, which is understandable. But Mountain True has created a new program called Neighbors for More Neighbors, and they're going to come and talk about it. And I am so thankful to them to kind of bring us together, because at the city Affordable Housing Committee, we oftentimes end up on the other side of issues across from the tree canopy groups and green space groups, and we don't want to be, right? We want to work together because development's going to happen and we want to do it right. So, all right, I brought Kelly with me today because she's our business banker, and I just want her to introduce herself so that way you'll know who to talk to at Home Trust when you have questions about business banking.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. It's great to be here. I always enjoy the opportunity to get in front of a group of people like y'all, because there's a lot of realtor power in this room today. And I know you probably primarily do residential real estate, but of course you're here today to learn more about commercial, and you may have opportunities, maybe even with existing clients that have a business banking lending need, or maybe they just need a business banker. So my role at Home Trust Bank is a business banking development officer. So I primarily manage our small business banking relationships. And typically those are business clients that have $2 million or less in revenue. I handle their whole relationship. So, I do business lending, we do equipment financing, we do business autos, we do commercial real estate lending, of course. And then also every aspect of the relationship, I'm kind of the quarterback for that relationship. So if you have business clients that you are working with that need a bank or need a banker, and as you are delving into the commercial real estate space, please keep me in mind. I'm always looking for people to partner with and looking for new clients to help. And even if you just have a question about something, you know, I talked to a residential realtor earlier this week, and she actually had a client that was interested in purchasing a commercial property. And she wasn't real comfortable having that conversation with the client because she didn't know a whole lot about it. So she called me and she said, hey, can you kind of give me the basics of, you know, the commercial states, real estate lending space so that I can, you know, have an educated conversation with my customer and kind of talk about the process and that kind of thing. So even if you just need to reach out to ask a question or, you know, something that you need to discuss with your client and you aren't quite comfortable doing that yet, feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to help. And I have put some of my business cards on each table, so feel free to take that and let me know if you need my assistance. I'll be glad to help.
Super. Thanks, Kelly.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thanks everyone. I'd love to be your loan officer. Contact me if you want to talk about mortgage products or housing or anything. See y'all at Christmas Jam.
Thanks, Paul. Okay. We're so pleased. I'm sorry?
We've got 2 speakers.
Oh, we got 2. Okay, sorry. I was only going to do a bio for Carla, so maybe I'll just skip it. Jessica and Carla from Carla and Company. Carla is the broker in charge, of course. I know I'm going to talk a little bit about you. Before moving to Asheville, worked as an attorney in London on really complex real estate deals. Came here, made commercial real estate brokerage her niche. Serves on a variety of boards, including, are you still on the Board of Adjustment for Buncombe County? Okay. And Jessica Augie. Okay, thank you. Sorry, I did not know. Blindsiding me a little bit. I appreciate that you've been coming to our short-term rental coalition meetings, which I'm going to make a shameless plug for that too. Lots of stuff heating up in the county on that topic. But we're grateful to both of you for coming and sharing with our members a little bit more about commercial real estate. So thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. All right. Hello, everybody. Can everybody hear me okay? I usually start my talks with, I have a funny accent. And so if there's something that I say that you don't understand, just stop me and ask me to repeat. And I don't have any drinks in me, so I should be easy to understand, but it can get pretty bad. So I'm Carla Barnard. I run a small boutique commercial real estate brokerage here in Asheville. We have 5 full-time brokers and 2 admins. We, until relatively recently, were an all-female company. The only one in the country that I'm aware of. Commercial real estate brokers tend to be over the age of 63 on average and male. So we are very odd ducks in our field, but I think we're navigating our way through it pretty well. We have a team that covers a very broad geographic scope. The smaller markets in Western North Carolina, you know, your Franklins and places like that do not tend to have big commercial brokerage coverage. And so although we're based out of Asheville, we go from here to Marion and pretty far south and heading up towards Johnson City and across to Hayward and beyond. So we have a very broad scope. And I think we do a good job of keeping the wheels on the bus, but we put a lot of miles on our cars for sure. Anybody who knows me well will know that I am not a very sentimental person and I'm not a very nostalgic person. And at Christmas time, I tend to be a little bit more so. And this morning, I was thinking about our team and what I would say. And I figured I would say something a little bit different than what I would normally say. Normally, I would say we're great communicators, we're responsive, we're reliable, they're hardworking. They have great customer service, but to be honest, should be a baseline for any broker, residential, commercial, whatever. Like that's a baseline. You need to know what you're doing and be good and respectful and manage your clients well. Over and above that, I think our team not only they really care, but they're also a really great and relatable example for the broader brokerage community. I think everybody here is self-made. Commercial brokerage has a very high barrier to entry because of how commissions work and how long the transaction times are. Our income looks like somebody about to like flatline on a heart monitor. It's like, she's doing well. Oh no, we're flatline. Oh, we're back. So that's really difficult to navigate. And not really by design, but our company has ended up being all people who are self-made, a number of single moms. A lot of our rivals hold a lot of real estate in this town. They come from legacy families with big commercial real estate holdings. And we are not those people. And we've been scrapping our way through it, and we have taken a good bit of market share. And I'm really proud of that, and I'm proud of them for being so resilient to get to that point. All right, moving on. For the rest of this talk, we're going to cover where we are, where 2023 has ended up, and where we think we're going. But we'll focus on a little bit of an orientation in our world. We do have another talk that we've been privileged to do here, where we talk about commercial real estate as it sits alongside other types of investments, like how does it perform compared to stocks and bonds and residential rentals and stuff. And hopefully we'll get the opportunity to delve into that again. We've also spoken here about how to value commercial properties and what's involved in that. But today we're just going to start fresh with a look into what our world looks like. So just flashing up our team, I'm sure many of you have encountered all these folks. And then you've got all ladies, and then we have a Daryl. Daryl is a very interesting character. He has a civil engineering background, mostly focuses on land and development. And we wanted him because one piece of mountain land can look like another piece of mountain land. And so Daryl is able to help our clients assess how many lots they can get, where their road needs to go, what that road's going to cost them, all that sort of stuff. He's been a really wonderful addition. And he takes a lot of flack in our office. So he's also a very resilient man. Okay, what is commercial real estate? For the most part, a piece of commercial real estate is something that is income producing. That means either somebody's going to own it and occupy it for themselves and run a business that allows them to make money, or they're going to lease it to other folks, and they're going to make money that way as passive. It's income producing. So if you hit into a piece of property and that's how it's being used, you are now in the world of commercial real estate. Other indicators, or very obvious indicators of whether something is commercial or not, is it zoned commercial? There are areas of our city that are very confusing. Between Merriman and Charlotte Street, there's a lot of things that look like houses, but actually that's all, pretty much commercially zoned. And, you would say, oh, well, I can see there's a juice bar there and there's a yoga studio there down the street. I must be able to do those things. Actually, no, there's very little retail allowed in that area. So really tune into the actual zoning designation of that property and its current use to help you determine what you're dealing with. And we have some horror stories where brokers and their clients have made assumptions that they can use a property that looks commercial for commercial purposes and actually can't. It's more residential, and vice versa. So mistakes made on both sides. What makes a commercial transaction different? There's a lot, but we have sales and we have leasing. And we have a large number of asset classes that we have to be experts in. Industrial, retail, multifamily, flex, hospitality, specialty, it goes on. And what that means is as a commercial broker, you have to wear a lot of hats and you have a lot that you have to keep on top of. So if you've got, 6 primary asset classes, you may be acting for a buyer, a seller, a landlord, or tenant. So that's 4 different transactional workflows and 4 different processes that you need to go through within each asset class. What happens in larger markets, in Atlanta, New York, even Charlotte, commercial brokerages tend to require their brokers to specialize. So you'll meet somebody and they only do landlord rep in the medical space, or they only do certain types of development, or they only do office, or they only do office for clients over 25,000 square feet. To get very, very narrow. In our area, it is almost impossible to do that because we do not have very much commercial real estate. most of America is residential real estate. And then municipalities decide where they will allow commercial activity. Our area does not, relatively speaking, have as much commercial real estate as a lot of other markets. And what that means for a broker is if you want to put gas in your car, you're probably going to have to learn to do a lot of different things. And hopefully as you mature into the role, you can maybe take off certain things and specialize a little bit. But for the most part, we are jacks of all trades. As far as the contracts, the transactional part, commercial transactions tend to be on a longer timeline. They're usually somebody is buying a piece of property for a specific purpose and they need to go really deep on whether they can do that and how will they do that and what will that cost them and is it going to cost them so much that they shouldn't buy or lease this thing. So we have longer due diligence periods. We have no due diligence fees typically. There's not even a space on our form for that. The reason is their due diligence items, like their inspections and appraisals, they're much more expensive. So my cheesy line is like, commercial due diligence versus residential is the same as like having a party versus a wedding. The wedding rental is always much more expensive. So your buyers have skin in the game. They're paying $4,000 for an appraisal at the moment. They're laying out a lot of money. And on the brokerage side, when you think about yourself as a fiduciary and having those types of obligations, you need to be very careful to make sure that you don't sleepwalk a client into going under contract for something that may not work. You need to try and move very quickly to figure out if fundamentally it works, because as soon as they go under contract, although they're not giving much money over to the seller side, usually they are going to start spending money really fast. So there's some responsibility there. I mentioned the higher barrier to entry with commercial real estate. It's that long transactional timeline, doing fewer transactions across the year, those transactions being more in depth, just mean that your income is pretty lumpy. We usually see people taking about 3 to 5 years to have, anywhere near a consistent pipeline. And that can be really hard. And I'm sure any other commercial broker will tell you the same too. And there's many points along the way where you could give up, but I think it's varied and interesting, so it's worth sticking with. Lending and rates. We have a lot of different loan types. The main thing you need to know is the loans tend to be more expensive. The rates are going to be a couple of points higher than prime, sometimes a little bit less. But you also have SBA backed loans, which in the past couple of years, like post-COVID, have really helped kind of grease the wheels of commerce, and people have sort of warmed up to SBA because they saw that when COVID hit, you got a freeze. You're first in line to get PPP. You're first in line to get EIDL. And so we had a brief blip of them being more popular than normal. They are much less popular this year than they were in the past 2 years because rates are so high in SBA loans. You're 10, 11% really read them on it. The lending fundamentally differs because the loan will not be sold on. The bank sits with it. So they are going to vet your client, and they are really going to vet the property because they are stuck with it. Your commercial buyer client's not getting a notice in the mail that whoever mortgages now owns their note. So the lending process takes longer. The appraisals are more in depth. They're interacted with by the lender in much more depth. There's a lot of back and forth on there, and that process is really sometimes very arduous for clients who've never done this before, and it can be a lot, and they turn to the brokers a lot of times to support them. And one of our jobs is at the start is to make sure that people are even in the position to get a loan. Have you done your taxes? All the things that you guys talk about. Please don't buy furniture on a hire purchase. All those things don't apply. But sellers, can find that very frustrating to be on the other side of. They don't want to be under contract for 6 months or 4 months or whatever and not know until the end whether it's going to happen. But it's something to bear in mind. The next thing that makes it different is, I think for the most part, you guys can check if something's allowed to be a home move on. Zoning is really important for us, and we need to be able to speak to the current ordinances, potential changes, making sure that the buyers are aware that they may not always be able to do what they want to do, and Asheville is a very heavily regulated environment in terms of zoning. And as you found out, it's a little bit less so, but that is changing. Even like Matt's talking about short-term rentals, that's been on the radar, but we're a tough place to transact commercial real estate and really know like what your future may hold. We've had hotel building moratoriums, billboard moratoriums, drive-through moratoriums. So you have to keep yourself fresh, and that can be a full job in itself. All right, I'm going to hand over to Jessica Augie. Jessica and I have a similar amount of time in the business, and actually she just completed her highest volume sale and has spent most of this year on it. But she just closed a $6.5 million deal.
We're very proud.
Thank you. Leasing is actually a big part of what we do. And in fact, it's a very complicated part of our job, and it's a time-consuming part of our job, and it's not a very lucrative part of our job. But in my opinion, it has provided me and all of us, I think, with very valuable learning experiences, and it's made us much better at our job so that we are actually equipped to handle large transactions like the one that I just closed. And some of our contemporaries may want to say, I don't want to do leasing. I'm just going to chase this big listing, and I'm going to chase this buyer with lots of cash. But how I got that sale was through doing very low volume commercial leases for small office spaces. So I paid my dues for many years with this client, and then finally was able to get this listing. So leasing is not something to turn your nose up at. And there are different types of commercial leases, and this is something that's often very confusing for businesses to understand. The 3 Ns, that's a triple net lease. That type of lease means that the tenant is also taking on a proportionate share of the landlord's operating expenses for the property. The 3 Ns or 3 nets are property taxes, property insurance, and common area maintenance. So a tenant will be reimbursing the landlord as additional rent for those overhead expenses. That is the most common type of commercial lease in most markets, and including in our market. And a lot of folks don't realize that they'll see the base price for the rent, which is usually a price per square foot. That price per square foot is per year. So you'll want to do that math and divide it by 12, and that'll get you your base monthly rent. And then the triple net expenses are additional rent. When we put out our listings, we try to provide very detailed information so people know from the start what they're getting into. And they'll know what those triple net expenses are for that additional rent. But a lot of our listing contemporaries here in this market do not provide that additional information. So you may think it's an affordable lease, and then come to find out you've got another $1,500 a month in additional rent. And the triple net portion of the rent, it is subject to change. Clearly, our taxes change, our insurance changes, and operating expenses. Some of the common area maintenance that would be included in that is like exterior lighting, security, if there is any on site, landscaping, those kinds of things. A modified gross lease is when the landlord is charging more of a flat rate. So they're not separating out the additional expenses for their taxes and insurance. So they usually want to have a good idea of what those expenses are. So they're making sure they're charging enough rent. Tenants are typically still in charge for their own maintenance within their space, and they're in charge of their own utilities. But when you see the rent price on the listing, if it's modified gross, it generally is what it is as far as the rent price. Full service leases, those are kind of more more common in office buildings. And that's when all of the expenses are built into the rent. So you'll typically see a much higher rental price for a full service lease. The tenants, utilities are often included, sometimes even their internet, janitorial of the office space. And there's usually going to be common elements that are shared amongst all of the tenants in these buildings. So there may be common restrooms, common break areas, even common conference rooms sometimes in these kinds of buildings. So most often you're going to see full service in office leases more so than in other ones, and typically in multi-tenant buildings. So other parts of leasing, new businesses and startups. Those are clients that we work with a lot, and we do a lot of education with these clients to help them be prepared and make sure they're actually ready to take this step, and including telling them what landlords are expecting to see from these startups and helping them understand how much money it really is going to take for them to be able to pull off this lease. Landlords want to know, that they're going to have a stable tenant. They're not going to be back trying to lease this space because someone's broken their lease after a year and trying to go back and pay another brokerage commission and put it out there and have another period of vacancy. And we want to vet our clients if they're our tenants. And when we're representing landlords, we want to help vet them as well. And typically when they're startups, we want to know, do they have a business plan? Maybe they started this business from home and it just grew really quickly and they're doing well, but they may not have an actual business plan. So having them back up and take those steps, because doing really well right now, but having sustained growth over many years, that's a different thing. And making sure that they're prepared for that and they can actually take on the responsibility of a lease. Also, financial projections is another thing that they're often wanting to see. Part of that business plan usually is going to be projecting out usually 3 to 5 years of how their business is going to perform and plugging in the expenses of just their business alone, but also how much their rent may cost, how much their utilities may cost. We want to know that they understand how much it's going to take and anticipating for unexpected expenses and contingencies in that as well. And how much money do they need? That can vary. It depends on the type of business, and it depends on the space that they're looking at. And they may be looking at a variety of types of spaces, some that are more turnkey, which is rare, and some that are going to need a lot of work. So that can vary greatly. You have a question?
Yeah, and just is that, do you guys do a retainer fee for that? It's like totally out of the real estate.
Oh, yeah. So there's a rumor that there was a broker like 20 years ago in Asheville that charged a retainer and did well, but I've yet to identify who that mythical broker was. But yeah, it's a bit like you guys. Like we're I tend to say like we're the sharp edge of the sword. Like we're usually the first person people come into contact with. And because they, as they're thinking about starting something, they don't know what rent costs. And so they come to talk to us, and we end up matching them with lenders and architects and general contractors. And I can't tell you how many clients I stop beside doing their, like registering their LLC and telling them where to get an operating agreement. And so you end up having to sort of steward these people through to getting started. And it is at times very labor intensive and time consuming. So, but we sort of see it as our social service. And, you're sort of betting that, if you identify the right client that's got potential and drive and they do well, then you're helping them get started, and maybe they'll move into a bigger space and maybe they'll want to buy a property. And I have done that a lot myself. Like I've done a lot of brewery brokerage, not so much trending at the moment. There's more closures and openings, but those breweries created a lot of people with disposable income and an interest in real estate, and people who wanted to go into like other markets. So it was worthwhile. But I have to say, at the time when you're in it, you're like, oh, well, it's a lot.
Yeah.
Do you want us to say questions then, or should we just ask?
Oh, either way.
Okay. So you're doing like a lot of extension spaces in Asheville, I'm sure everywhere aren't turnkey. So is there like modifications paid for by the landlord, or is a lot of that by the tenant? And then like, if so, like what type of lease would that be if like the landlord's making a lot
It could be any of those types of leases. It depends. And typically those expenses are shared, and a landlord usually has those expectations up front of what they are willing to do for the tenant. And then we try to help the tenant understand what is usual and customary for a tenant to take on as far as their own expenses for improving a space. But it's usually a little bit of both. And sometimes it's easier, and depending on the landlord and their situation, we may want to go in and say, look, we're going to take the space as is. You don't have to do a thing. We're going to spend all of our own money. We're going to be improving your space and making this a more valuable space. And it's going to be more valuable than when we showed up. Therefore, we need 5 months of free rent in exchange for that. So it's usually a negotiation and a balance. And some landlords are like, no, we actually want to give you 3 months. Well, then, okay, why don't I do this work? And maybe, there isn't a restroom here. There's stubbed out plumbing, but there's no restroom. So I'll build out that restroom. But once I've paid all of my contractors, then I'm going to submit that invoice and you'll give me 10 grand back after that. So there are a variety of ways that we can negotiate between the responsibilities for landlords and tenants.
And that's quite common when like a new business is getting a loan, that like a lender knows that there's going to be like upfront costs to actually modify the building.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, like a responsible lender is going to say, okay, you have to have everything spec'd out, and they're going to lend for them to do their upfit or to buy the property, and then they're probably going to require them to borrow some working capital because they want to make sure that they actually get, they're not spent by the time they open the door. So that's definitely part of the process. And it's this is a real hot button kind of topic at the moment, this idea of tenant improvement money. Historically, we had so little inventory and so much demand, at least for the past 10 years. We hadn't seen a lot of leases with tenant improvement money, but the cost of construction and the cost of borrowing and the kind of burden on the tenant is really high at the moment. And so they're pushing for more contribution to the landlord for, capital expenditure. Kind of swung a little bit.
And to piggyback on that, how much money do they actually need? It's not just their day-to-day business, like looking at what their expenses are to operate their business from their home right now is one thing, but adding all of the overhead in it and paying to improve a space, paying for all the marketing because now they have that new space, paying for employees, merchant services potentially, but also they're going to need money for working capital because they can't expect to make money from day one. And they're going to need money for contingencies as well. National tenants, so just switching gears now to national tenants, they're a little bit different from a lot of the mom and pops that you work with. And so the process can look a little bit different. And they're typically looking at higher value spaces, and they'll usually have specifications on what their requirements are of a space and specifications of what they're expecting from their landlord as well. And a lot of times these bigger national tenants are represented by brokerages or firms that are not in our market. And as you all know, you have to be licensed in the state of North Carolina to do brokerage here. However, we do have a limited service, limited commercial license that these brokers can get. Oftentimes they don't get that because they never set foot in the state. They never see the property themselves. They just go from the specifications of what the tenant requires and they broker the deal that way. That can be a little bit challenging for us, particularly when they have no idea. I'm sure you can anticipate the same thing if you're showing a home and you're talking to a broker and they've never even seen it, and you're trying to explain things about the property that they wouldn't understand unless they actually set foot in it. So that can add another layer of complication. But a lot of times these corporate tenants also have their own lease that their attorneys have drawn up, and they'll be very in-depth, extensive leases that they require. Usually when we are representing landlords, the landlord provides the lease to the tenant. And just like we have our standard form contracts provided by realtors, we also have commercial contracts and commercial leases. So we have a standard bar form lease for single tenant facilities and for multi-tenant facilities. And for the less complex transactions, those tend to work pretty well, and they're rather neutral, not favoring the landlord or the tenant too heavily. on either side. But these national tenants often come with a lease that we're expected to use, and therefore the landlord will have to hire an attorney to review that lease and provide comments. So leasing, as you can see, can take a very long time as well, because we're not just negotiating the terms on the front end, and it can get very complicated when you're talking about improvements to the buildings and who's going to take on what. But then there's also the lease review and waiting on attorneys to provide comment back and forth. So how do brokers get paid on these deals? So typically for commercial leasing, we're getting paid a percentage of the base rent for the initial term of the lease. So as I was talking about triple net leases before, there's the base rent, which is that price per square foot, and then there's the additional rent for the property expenses. We don't get paid on that, the additional property expense portion of the rent. We only get paid on the base rent. The commission percentages are somewhat similar to residential transactions in our area, typically 6%. Each side gets 3%. And, so that's kind of how that works. But a lot of times, because there's such little inventory, we're having to look off market for these opportunities and trying to negotiate with the landlords to get compensation. Or, as you know, in the MLS, we disclose what the compensation is going to be for the cooperating broker. And if we put our listings in the MLS, we have to do the same. And therefore, that brokerage is then obligated to reimburse at the rate that was disclosed in the MLS listing. Well, in commercial, not all of the commercial brokerages are realtors. They're not all in the MLS. And that's another thing we didn't even put in here. We like to put our listings in the MLS. We are realtors, but we also have to utilize several other commercial resources to put our listings in, and that all cost a lot of money. But when those brokers are not realtors and they're not putting them in the MLS, we have to verify how we're going to get paid. And so we have to have a written fee agreement with those brokers. And sometimes that can be a little bit challenging to get it, even though I may have an email that says, yeah, I'll pay you 3%. That's about sometimes all we have to ensure that we're getting paid. And we don't usually get paid as soon as the lease is signed. Sometimes we get paid half of the rent or half of the commission when the lease is signed. And then, as I was saying before, sometimes tenants are coming in and they're not paying rent until the 6th month because they did all these improvements on the front end and that was negotiated. So then we'll get the other half when the tenant starts paying rent. But it also follows the listing agreement and whatever that agreement is. And we don't always know what the listing agreement was when we're representing a tenant. And I had a surprise this year where I did a pretty low value lease. And then I find out that I'm going to be paid quarterly over 5 years for a commission total of $1,100. So we're going to get paid $54 every quarter for the next 5 years. So asking those questions on the front end when you're working with the listing broker, of course, our priority is our client, and we're going to do what we have to do to help them get the space that's appropriate for them. But it's worthy in that first conversation with that landlord or landlord rep, what is the payment schedule on this so we can plan accordingly? Because sometimes it might make sense to go to your client and ask for compensation.
I was just going to ask you that. Is it reasonable or customary to ask the client to participate in this?
I believe it's reasonable. It's not totally customary at this point. And when we're having our initial conversation and going over the working with real estate agents disclosure and going over our agency agreement is an exclusive buyer tenant representation agreement. So it covers both purchasing and leasing, even if we're only focused on one thing. And I think, and a lot of people don't realize when you first read that first page, it says client shall pay firm X, yeah. Right? So ultimately they are on the hook, but what we like to tell them from the beginning is and it says it on the top of page 2, we first seek that compensation through the listing agent from the seller or leasing agent. But I let them know from the beginning that if, there may be a time, especially if I'm trying to find something off market and that landlord isn't willing to pay us, that we may need to come to you for compensation. But at no point are we going to say you're responsible for this commission unless we've talked about it first.
Yeah.
So I like to put that out there so they know from the beginning there's a chance. And of course, we like to try to work with them if that ends up being the case.
And I think your clients, if you do repeat business with people and they've gone through the process before, they know how much work is involved, right? It's just when you got somebody that's new and they're not sure everything, and they've never slogged through a lease review with a broker before, they may not value it. And it's a harder conversation. But with the folks that know the magnitude of the work, usually we can get them comfortable with the idea that we might want to get paid something.
Yeah, it's good fun.
Yeah, sometimes we do have to say this is how we make a living.
Yeah, just a couple questions about that. They mentioned that in school that a lot of times the leases get paid monthly or quarterly or whatever. Is that common?
It's pretty common. I Hillman Beer, I did that. Their first lease, I did their other lease, but their first lease in Sweet Creek Road. Every September, I get $384, and that would for 10 years.
And that's one of the fascinations I have with commercial. I'm a big fan of recurring revenue, not so much $54 a quarter in your defense, but it's interesting to me, and I guess that also makes me wonder about lease renewal. I mean, is that if you keep tabs on your clients, do you get anything off that?
We don't typically get paid on renewals. The listing agreements typically don't provide for that, and it's just an administrative
I think
burden
some
too.
firms do. My philosophy is, I think if I'm putting a tenant in a space and I've flagged it up and I've helped them get there, that's great. If they decide 5-10 years time that they still want to stay there, I feel like that's more a reflection of the landlord and the tenant and their relationship and the property, and it's not really about us. So philosophically, I'm opposed to charging on renewals or additional rents and things like that. I don't think it's right from the landlord's perspective, personally.
I think we're running a little tight on time. I'm vetting tenants for landlord clients. We also want to help make sure that they're going to be a qualified tenant that's going to stay there, because the last thing we want is to get paid a commission and then a year later feel really guilty because they've gone out of business and we've been paid a commission. So we try to help make sure that we're vetting clients and doing background checks and making sure they approve of funds and things like that. So if you have more questions on that, you can let us know.
What's the range of typical leases, like the length of time?
I'd say the most common type of lease for a local or low to medium kind of tenant is probably a 5-year lease, with some options to renew. National credit, larger tenants, they tend to be on 10 years. And I think from a landlord's perspective, usually anything over 3 is good. And annual leases, they do happen, we see them, but it's a headache for everybody because 6 months in they have to notify whether they want to renew or not. So just Matt, on time, how long have we got?
Usually go till 1.
Are you guys willing to give us an extra 5?
Sure.
All right, we're going to speed through it. So a big aspect, especially in the past 10 years for commercial brokers in our area, is helping clients who want to develop. Development tends to kind of go through, there's fads and trends and what's popular. We've had a recent self-storage boom. Everybody wants to do self-storage. And apartments, you've seen them spread up everywhere around here. There's going to be more. And the sort of a newer trend being smaller footprint single family residences. That's your DR Hortons that have come into this market. Horton will come into the market and they're going to interact with commercial brokers and send them all into a frenzy trying to get them lovely, flat, easy, buildable land for cheap. I think a sort of a trend to watch out for is the build to rent townhome product. People are renting for much longer. They are coming out of college with debt. They're living with their parents for longer. They initially are in a rental product for longer, and then they are downsizing later in life and often into something that's a little less maintenance. And so for residential development, it is important for those people to try and keep people renting for as long as possible and to make it easy. That's why you see an apartment block and then there's self-storage down the street. Build the apartment smaller, they're going to need to store their stuff. But people, when, if they have kids, or they want a little bit of outdoor space, that townhome product feels for the renter much like what a home feels like for an owner. And so we're seeing more of that. And kind of interestingly, and Jess will touch on it, but they're paying more per acre than the multifamily folks and the single family folks. So that's sort of current trend. What's important for any of these developers, fairly obvious stuff. Does it have water, septic, all your public utilities? Is it zoned right? How much grading, how much dirt are they going to move? We are in the mountains. You're either in a valley and it's going to have some element of flood or be close to it, or you're on a slope and you're going to cut out all that dirt, and that's really expensive activity. You as a broker need to be able to at least speak to that and think about the topography before you just look at a listing and start pinging it to these people that do it for a living. You can show your rear end very quickly by not sending sites that actually work. Access and egress, again, you got to think about lights and intersections. And, if you're talking about a very large development, they are going to have impact on traffic flow and everything around them. And there'll be a lot of conversation about that. Our area is really difficult to develop in. The dirt is really expensive. Most developers, they come here and they just throw their hands up and they say, you know what, I can do like 10 projects in Charlotte that's flat in the time I can grind through one thing in Asheville. So we need to sell people on Asheville and Western North Carolina first and really get them on board before we even are talking about sites. Resistance from local communities, that is building. That's something that has gotten us a lot of attention outside of the area within the development community. And, whether it's retail or hotel or multifamily, we're known to be a difficult, highly charged, politicized environment, which is very normal for somewhere that is growing rapidly and is perceived to be changing very quickly for the people who've been here for a long time. So no surprises there, but it is a big turnoff. And the issue of infrastructure, in particular sewer, is like number one biggest problem for us. Like, I like to read the MSD board minutes, and I don't think many people do that, but like our water and sewer infrastructure does not stretch as far as people might imagine. So it's something that you need to be really tuned into. Like, is this site anywhere proximate to the things that you need for density? And the client's going to expect you to be able to talk to that. And one of the things that we see a lot of is really overpriced land around here, and land that sits for commercial listings, a year on the market's not abnormal. A lot of land sits on the market for like thousands and thousands of days. Primary reason is the listing broker or the seller or a mixture of both didn't really think about like whether it could be developed and does it have all these utilities that it needs, and is it expensive to grade it out? So you can sharpening up on that is really important, or having relationships with civil engineers and architects and land planners that can help your clients navigate through that. Very important. All right, we're going to give you a very quick update on where our market stands.
And our first at the top on lending stats, we just updated that this morning. That is an outdated percentage. Primed as of today is 8.5%. So commercial bank loans, we're seeing on average around 9%. And it can be a little less, it can be a little bit more, but that's the average for a 5 to 10 year term. Typically, commercial loans are going to have a shorter term with a balloon payment after 5 or 10 years. Vacancy rates, that is how much of a percentage of all of the space that we have in our market, how much of it is available and vacant right now. In industrial, we're at about 3.1%. Office, we're at 2.5% vacancy, and in retail, 1.6%. So as you can see, vacancy is extremely low, and we have very, very little inventory, and that makes our job extremely difficult when there's a lot of demand in the area for space. Another thing we're looking at right now is construction. Contractor backlogs remain at 9+ months. There's a very strong shortage of skilled labor, and that is making projects take a lot longer, and the prices are a little bit all over the place, as well as pricing for materials themselves. Nationally, looking at vacancy rates, it's pretty different. Industrial, 6.7%, office, 9.3%, and retail at 6.9%. So you can see the difference in how we compare to the national vacancies. And so when you're seeing national news of, oh, this large office building, now they're going to convert it into affordable housing, that's just not something we're seeing here or likely to see here, because we do not have the space to do that. Okay, moving on to the next one. Thank you.
And the building will be turned into a hotel anyway.
Potentially, yep. 2023 year in review. So I'm going to kind of start at the bottom here and work my way up. I think we're all aware of the challenging economic times that we are in right now. It's overall been a much more difficult year for transactions. The first probably 2 quarters of this year, we were all like, what are we doing? What is happening? Yikes. That fortunately has changed a little bit. And Carla is going to elaborate a little bit more on that. But buyers are wary, and they're keeping a close eye on the economic factors and the interest rates and things. But still think business is going on and transactions are happening. Just to point out a couple of sizable transactions in our market in this past year. In Mills River, there was a $26.5 million transaction for a large greenhouse facility. The Outlet Mall, as you're all probably aware, that just sold off market for $70 million. We have heard the Sears box on Tunnel Road is under contract with a local company. So we'll hopefully see that close out and hear more about that soon. The Country Inn and Suites in Westgate, that's a hotel that's for sale. There's a lot of demand for buying hotels in our market. They don't come up very often. That one was listed a little bit over $14 million. We think it's still under contract. We haven't seen that close yet. And then the Mountaineer Inn over here just sold at $6.1 million. A couple of interesting transactions within the firm. We had a large kind of industrial facility that used to be the Echo View Fiber Mill out on Jupiter Road in I guess is it Weaverville, technically Barnardsville. It's an over 18,000 square foot facility, beautiful facility that was leased by the oldest European cannabis seed company, and they chose this area for their U.S. hub. And I forgot the name of the company.
Just Amazing. They're a cannabis seed direct to consumer distributor.
And they bought that building on Tuesday.
They looked on the map, and out of all of them, they said, that looks pretty. We've never been here, nor most places in the US, and we will go here. And they did.
Wow. Did they buy it or lease it?
Lease. Yeah, they leased it. Yep.
Free samples?
I don't know. Another one, Carla had a listing recently for the building where High Five Coffee is on Rankin Avenue. That property was only on the market for 8 days. They got 6 offers, and all of them resubmitted their offers and increased them twice. So we thought that was pretty interesting. We thought that it was brought out a little bit higher of a price because it hadn't been long since it had sold before. So we were very surprised. It shows that there's strong demand. Price matters. If it's under $1 million, we can likely get it sold pretty quickly. There is a development deal that Carla was involved with on Christ School Road, where a large tract of land sold for about $300,000 an acre, and that was for a build-to-rent product. So those folks are going to pay more price per acre for that build-to-rent product because it's a higher revenue generator. And then, of course, the transaction that I just closed last week, it was 14.9 acres on Hendersonville Road down in Fletcher. There were 5 fully leased commercial buildings and commercial land area that was sold there with a lot of different tenants, and that was sold to actually a local company continuing at a similar operation, and they purchased that for $6.5 million. We were only on the market for 45 days before we got under contract, and we actually had an offer within a week, but it just took that long to get that contract, signed. And we have a new listing that we're pretty proud of. My colleague Stacy Wheeler is working on the Catawba Vale Innovation Market. Old Fort, if you're not familiar with it, go check it out. That area is undergoing a revitalization. And this is a very large scale of 30,000 square foot mixed use development that they're going to be leasing out. It's going to have office space, and retail space, and restaurant space. So those are just a few of the notable things that our team's been working on.
All right, looking forward, everybody says I don't have a crystal ball, and I don't either. And I can only rely on like my own experience. There's a lot of negativity. I think if you talk to a lot of our commercial broker colleagues, they feel that 2023 is like the year where we couldn't advise our clients what the hell to do because we just couldn't predict what would happen. The first 6 months was really quiet, really low number of transactions overall of any asset type. And then it seems like since July it has like picked up, and we're going to end up like close to where we were last year on volume. We expect that next year is going to be similar. Election years are usually hard for us. People just stop making decisions, it seems like, in September and October, or they feel, nervous, and it just feels like an overwhelming time sometimes. So I'm wary about that. I would say I don't think personally I feel as worried, I guess, as some of the sort of doomsday thinkers that we have at the moment, because if you look at like the 30-year return on bonds, I mean, it's still looking at 4.5. Rates are it seem like they're going to come down. They're not going to come down probably to where they were, but I think in the next like 18 months to 2 years, we can shave a point off, I would think. And we see that like there are a lot of people who, they work for companies where that company needs to grow and continue to develop in order for their people and themselves to be employed. And so they will find a way, hopefully, to navigate more difficult times, more expensive times, and continue to develop and, close out deals. Sellers, I think, are also slowly adjusting to the new reality. And as brokers, I think we all have to work to help people meet in the middle and to help our sellers understand that as far as a commercial transaction goes, it is math. Like it works or it does not work. It works for their purpose. With residential, buyers will overpay for the roof over their head. There are aesthetic and personal and lifestyle reasons that they will overpay. Very rarely does that happen in commercial. It's like they've got to pay a note or they've got to cover their expenses. So our sellers in Asheville in particular, I think, are still feeling like it's boom time, and they see all these record home sales and go, why isn't this happening for me with my commercial property? And that's why. But I think as we settle into a higher interest rate environment, hopefully our sellers will also be willing to come down off their expectations a little bit. Sometimes we hear people talk about Asheville. Well, Asheville's different. We're a bubble. We're so special. I think the truth is that we are. We had the Economic Development Coalition. We asked them to come in to our firm, and we asked them to pitch Asheville to us like they pitch to companies they're trying to attract to the area. And it was a really interesting exercise. And the girls here have heard me say it before, but the most important stat that I heard was, as long as population here has been tracked, Asheville has never lost population. It has only grown, even in a recession. So that tells me that we are in a resilient space, and we are in a possibly more stable market than sometimes we all feel, and the demand will still be there. Like the vacancy rates that Jessica's talking about, I mean, we're doing better than Manhattan, folks. So there's plenty of reasons to be positive. So fingers crossed next year will be as good as last. All right, any questions? That was a little rapid fire, sorry.
So you'd mentioned the other, commercial platforms and where LoopNet, or is there a specific one that you recommend? Like, we don't want to pay for all of them.
CoStar. LoopNet is the marketing arm of CoStar. CoStar is the core product. It's where all the data lives. Fed in by agents so that then CoStar can charge us loads of money for it. It's every commercial firm's largest overhead. CoStar, there's a rival product called Prexy, and they keep trying to break into the market, but unfortunately, because as Jessica mentioned, commercial brokers are not all in the MLS. The MLS is not the central hub, and the firms have not found a way to agree on like which platform they want to list in. So you end up like when you're searching for something for lease or for sale, you're going to check LoopNet and CoStar and Crexi, and you're also going to, you know, call brokers that you know don't put their listings out anywhere. And so it's really scrappy. But I think if you're going to do one, I would say CoStar.
Yeah, so I had a question about like when developers are kind of like come up with actual like plans and do it for the one city. Where does that step come into the process? I assume it's after they're under contract.
They're not going to spend that money with engineers and architects until they know that they've got the property under their control. And then at that point, their work will begin. They'll do all their geotech and all that sort of stuff first, and their borings, and then they'll sit with the civil design team and they will make a plan. And your typical contract is going to say to the seller that the buyer's going to stay in due diligence in 2 stages. They call our inspection period, where they're doing all those tests, and then once they know what they're doing, a government approvals period. And they're only going to close after they know that they can do what they want to do. You know, sometimes you get people who are like confident, they've got cash and they need to spend it and they might close faster. But, you know, I'm working on a deal on Gill Branch Road in Weaverville. It'll be the largest development that's ever happened in Weaverville, and I've been working on it for 3 years.
Trying to get approval.
Approval, there's not even just city approval. It's like, then you got to go to DOT, you got to go to MSC, you got to get allocated your water and your sewer and all these things. You got to get your stormwater permits. Montgomery County's backed up by more than 6 months on their stormwater permits. You know, it takes a long time to bring it all together.
So do you ever get to that? I mean, that's like tens of thousands of dollars to do all those plans and all that kind of stuff. So like, you ever get to does someone ever get to the end and essentially they just can't do it?
Yep, all the time.
Oh, yeah.
And that's how we said that.
But you do all that during the 2 steps of due diligence.
Yeah, they don't. I mean, these people hopefully know what they're doing.
Yeah.
Who you got to worry about is somebody who says like, I have a rental home and then I had a short-term rental and then I built a duplex, and then all of a sudden they're like, you know what, I'm going to do like a project in West Asheville and I'm going to build 20 units. They're the ones you got to be like really worried about.
Yeah. And that's where the buyer's skin in the game is.
Yeah.
They're not paying a due diligence fee because they're spending tens of thousands of dollars sometimes and not knowing if they can buy it or not.
I happened to have this wonderful deed land in my lap earlier this year, and actually the Weaverville deal, is that what LDG affordable housing?
No.
So contacted by a development manager who works for a developer out of Louisville, Kentucky. They're called LDG, and they're either one or two I think number one builder of affordable apartment units in the U.S. right now. They were interested in 17 acres off of Holbrook Road, Starnes Cove Road, Asheville, right about exit 44. And we've been negotiating back and forth, really close to going into contract on that, which is really cool. The one thing that's been very encouraging to me is that, LDG develops, like I said, all over. They're in Raleigh, they're in Texas, they're right now, but they're probably going on. And because their focus is strictly affordable housing, they're either looking at what they call affordable housing, which would be for folks whose income is 60% of the, am I saying that right? 60% of the.
That's more deeply affordable than what the city of Asheville, for example, kind of is affordable.
Yeah.
I think they're at 80% of median income.
Yep, that's right.
Yeah.
I think 80% is considered workforce housing, for that kind of, it's affordable for people who actually work normal jobs, a nurse and a school teacher. But long story short is that contact with the developer that we've been working with, he has been super, super, super encouraged by Asheville and Montgomery County on how, and like everyone he talks to here, so I've never experienced this anywhere else that we've ever worked in this country, is that people in this area are hungry for affordable housing and are it sort of has pervaded our culture, especially our real estate culture here in town. that, he said, I've never called up different organizations and had to be like, oh, you're looking to build, 320 units of affordable housing. Wow. So that was really cool and encouraging to me that, that it all seems like we're super aware of how badly the need is here. And even people in the larger organizations, government organizations, and, even people on the corporate side, we all kind of seem to be on the same page about that.
Yeah, I think we need to take the next step and say, okay, we all really want that. So, and our dirt is really expensive. So what does that mean? That means you have to get comfortable in your development ordinance with going vertical, which they are not, and people get a lot of pushback on.
At the
So
city, we're making exceptions to parking rules. We're doing we have land use incentive grants. There's a lot of things that you can submit for if you're in the city. For
The county
benefits.
doesn't have anything.
Yeah, so I encourage them to look into that.
Yeah.
Also, in this example, if you are a proponent of affordable housing, and many of us are, what ends up happening is they get to council, because almost everything has to be voted on by council, which is sort of rare in our area. And everybody seems to be for affordable housing, but not in my backyard.
Yeah.
So what happens is that vote, that council meeting, the community around it, 100 people will show up and speak against it and scare council out of voting for it. So we're all for affordable housing, but unfortunately, not in my backyard. Yeah, seems to be the prevailing, the winner in that.
We had
It
talked
actually
about
has
this when
a-
we had lunch, but this particular development is just outside the city limits, so.
Well, the county has, so the city has a sort of more politicized process where it goes up to people who are, may be considering whether they're going to get voted back in. The county has a quasi judicial process using the Board of Adjustment, like their zoning board. It is lay people, I would say it's lay people with certain experience in being able to read plans and stuff. And I'm the vice chair of that board. And that quasi judicial process works very well. We have state regulations. There's a lot of case law about how things have to be decided, and a lot of parameters on it. And I think it results in good decision making and more certainty for all parties involved. But I'm biased.
Unless the county changes that, and they do
I know, right? Did you have
Well,
one?
thank you so much. Any final questions?
Well, I was just gonna say, could you guys work together Costco to come see you?
I have tried so many times. So many times.
There's a great place in Swannanoa.
Never mind that. The Innsbruck Mall in Montana Road was for sale. And if you take the Greenville Costco and you take their site plan, including all our parking, you can set it over top of the Innsbruck Mall and it looks beautiful. And they wouldn't do it. And they wouldn't do it because on paper, our median income is really low and they need a certain number of households with over 150K household income a year. And they, our area on paper does not convey. You can go into CoStar and show how much money is here. There's all these second home owners. There's people who they're keeping their money elsewhere. And we have such a hard time showing that our demographics can support stuff like that.
What about a Trader Joe's on South?
Yeah, South Asheville Trader Joe's.
No, the Trader Joe's has I think a 15-mile radius that they throw out where they're not having a feeding one. So, I mean, Phoenix has I think 2 or something. So,
Why can't they just get an appropriately sized parking lot? That would be great.
Right?
Well, thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Yeah.